All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. This morning, I'd like to talk about the dichotomy between post-structuralist existentialism and classic empiricism in post-revolutionary societies. But we don't have time for that. So instead, we'll address the question, is Christianity just true for you? Is Christianity just true for you? And really that phrase, true for you but not for me, like you see on the slide, that really exemplifies a philosophy that's very common in our society. In fact, I'd say that most people hold to this philosophy known as relativism. Now, relativism is the technical term, that's the philosophical term, and I'd say, although most people hold to this philosophy, most people don't know the technical term. They don't know about it in philosophical terms. So we'll get into formal definitions, formally defining the word relativism a little bit later, but I thought we could start off by looking at relativism in the way that it's typically encountered in our culture, as a series of common phrases that most people have adopted into their language. Phrases like, that may be true for you, but that's not true for me, right? Like the slide on there. Or you've probably heard this one, there is no truth. Or how about this one, that's not my reality. Or you may have heard this one, it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you're sincere. How many of you have heard these phrases before? Yeah, they're pretty common in our society. And if you think about it, people typically use these phrases not so much to start a conversation. Like they're not usually trying to start a deep philosophical conversation on the nature of truth. They're not trying to have a deep conversation where they're exploring your truth and trying to compare it to their truth. No, typically when people use these phrases, they're typically using them not so much to start a conversation, but rather to end a conversation. You may be sharing the gospel message, and you're talking about how Jesus died as a ransom for our sins. He died to pay for our sins. And God offers a free pardon because of that. And we can accept that free pardon. And someone may say, oh, that's good. That may be true for you, but that's not true for me. And basically what that means is the conversation is over. Well, this is the philosophy of relativism. Now let's define relativism a little bit more precisely here. Relativism is the idea that each person makes up their own reality. It's the idea that the world conforms to your own thoughts, your own views, and your own beliefs. Put simply, it's the idea that everyone has their own truth. So let's look at this question. Is truth relative? Of course, that's a huge question, so we're going to break it down a little bit. We're going to look at two basic forms of relativism, and then we'll look at one more carefully nuanced version of relativism. So the first basic type of relativism is the relativist who says there is no truth. There's no truth. Or sometimes you might hear it this way, there's no such thing as truth. This is actually a very common phrase to find on the university campus. In fact, I ran into it at ASU. Some students and even some professors would say there is no truth. Now, I want you to think about that statement for a second. There is no truth. Does anyone see a problem with that statement? Yeah, I see several of you going, yeah, there's a problem with that. But I think for a lot of us, we can't quite put our finger on what the problem is. We see that there's something wrong with that statement, but we can't quite figure out what's going wrong with that statement. Well, to help you see the problem with that statement, I want to give you a different statement that suffers from the very same problem. And that different statement is this. What if I say to you guys, in English, I cannot speak a word of English? Now, does anyone see a problem with that? Yeah, what's the problem with that statement? Yeah, I'm speaking English and saying I can't speak English. It's a contradiction, right? Well, it's kind of like saying, my brother is an only child. Yeah. Or how about this one? You can't believe a word I say. Just think about that for a second. Or you've probably seen this one on, if you filled out mortgage documents, you come across this one. This page intentionally left blank. Not anymore. How about this one? My friend is a married bachelor. Actually, I think some guys think that you can actually be a married bachelor, but it's actually a contradiction. You can't be married. And, okay, you guys get it. And this one, I'm pretty sure this one's a contradiction. He's an honest politician. I'm pretty sure. I don't know, maybe it's theoretically possible. But anyway, these statements are what the philosopher Greg Koukl describes as statements that commit suicide. They cancel themselves out, right? Well, the statement, there is no truth, suffers from the same problem. Because when someone says there is no truth, they're assuming that that statement is true. Yeah, exactly. So they're basically saying it's true that there is no truth. So they're contradicting themselves. So when someone says there is no truth, you can simply ask them, is that true? And they immediately see the problem, right? You're putting them face to face with the contradiction in their own view. So if someone says there is no truth, you could simply ask them, is that true? But what if someone says, okay, no, I wouldn't say there is no truth. There is truth, but you have your truth and I have my truth. We each have our own truth. So what do we do with that? This is that second basic form of relativism. It's the same as that statement that we saw at the beginning. That may be true for you, but that's not true for me. In fact, this kind of came up recently in popular culture. I'm not much up on sort of pop culture and the world of models and Kardashians and all that kind of mess. But apparently, someone who is a part of that show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Jordan Woods, was involved in a whole scandal recently, had said in an interview, she said, everyone has their truth. Everyone has their truth. And then she went on to say, everyone has a right to speak their truth. So this is that second basic form of relativism. Now, to give you a sense of how this would work out in an actual conversation, someone who holds this view, how they would actually express that in conversation, I want to tell you about an experience I had actually many years ago. My friend, many of you know Marty. Marty was there, and my wife Amanda, they were both there. This was actually back before I used to do these formal presentations, in these sorts of classes, because originally this group was called Mars Hill, and it was originally a research and discussion group. And so we would get together once a week, and we'd pick a topic, and over the course of a week, we would research that topic. We'd go our separate ways, research the topic, and then come together and talk about what we had found. And we wouldn't just invite Christians, we would invite atheists and skeptics and people of various other religions to come and join us. They would go and research the question from their perspective too. And we'd come together and talk about our different perspectives, what we had found in our research, and what our conclusions were, and talk about why we believed the different things we believed. So as you can imagine, we had some great conversations, some really interesting conversations. But I'll never forget, there was one gentleman who came for a while, and the first night that he came, as was our usual custom, we began to explain to him what the purpose of Mars Hill was. Anytime someone new would come, we'd explain what the purpose was. And so I started to explain that as a group, we were going to research these big questions and see if we can come to some conclusions on the truth of these matters. And he stopped me right there. And he said, wait, what do you mean by truth? Truth is relative. You have your truth and I have my truth. Well, I was kind of taken off guard because, we usually don't get into these kind of questions until later in the evening. I had hardly even taken a sip of my coffee, and he's asking, he's saying truth is relative. So I'm kind of thrown off, but Marty was ready with an illustration. He was ready with a response, and he used an illustration to help clarify this gentleman's view. He said, okay, help me understand. When you say truth is relative, help me understand how that would work in the real world, in like a real world situation. So let's imagine there's a husband and a wife, and they're standing in their kitchen, and they're standing in front of their refrigerator. And the husband says to the wife, honey, we're out of milk, and so I'm going to run to the store and get some milk. And she says, no, we're not out of milk. There's milk in the refrigerator. And he says, no, I'm telling you, there's no milk in the refrigerator. And she says, I'm telling you, there is milk in the refrigerator. And they argue back and forth like married couples almost never do. But the point is that Marty said, no, either there is milk in the refrigerator or there's not milk in the refrigerator. So someone's going to end up being wrong here. And I'll never forget, he said, no, they're both right. It's true for one person that the milk is there. It's true for the other person that the milk is not there. And so Marty said, no, wait a minute. You mean they each believe different things, but it's not actually true that the milk is there and it's true that the milk is not there at the same time. And he said, that's what I'm saying. It's true for one person that the milk is there. It's true for the other person that the milk is not there. So now Marty and I are both scratching our heads because he clarified. he's saying the milk is both there and not there at the same time. So we're scratching our heads going, oh man, how in the world? Clearly there's something wrong with this. How do you put it into words? Well, finally we were able to help him see the problem with that view by asking one simple question. And the one question that we asked was, what happens when you open the refrigerator door, right? When you open the door, the milk is not going to be there and not be there at the same time. So we were able to help him see that two contradictory ideas can't both be true at the same time. That's the law of non-contradiction, like Josh was saying. And this turns out to be the first problem with this type of relativism. And really, this is the very same problem that we saw with the statement, there is no truth. They're basically saying it's true that there is no truth, and so it violates the law of non-contradiction. Well, similarly, when you say each person has their own truth, well, what happens when two people believe opposite things? Then it violates the law of non-contradiction to say that they're both true. Both statements are true. Now, the conversation took a very strange turn later in the evening, because the same gentleman who was telling us the truth is relative, later on was trying to convince us that the Bible is myth, that the historical statements in the Bible are not real history, but instead they're myth, they're not true. Now, does anyone see a problem with that? Do you guys see where he went wrong there? It's a contradiction, right? We have another problem here, because basically what he's saying is whatever you believe is true for you, but what you believe is false. So he's contradicting himself again. And so it turns out this is the second problem with relativism, is that the relativist can never say that someone is wrong. They can never say that someone is wrong, no matter how ridiculous their view might be. I mean, even if they believe that the moon is made of green cheese, or if they believe something crazy like that the Twilight series was a literary masterpiece, something crazy like that. Sorry, for those of you who like Twilight. Anyway, the point, you guys know I pick on Twilight a lot. Anyway, the point is, no matter how ridiculous their view might be, they can never say that it's wrong. It's just true for them and not true for the relativist. So this is the second problem with relativism, and it's going to be, it actually gets worse for the relativist, because the relativist not only can't say that someone else is wrong, they also can never say that they're really right about anything in any meaningful sense. They can't be right about anything because it's just true for them. It doesn't go beyond them. They can't tell someone else, hey, I got this right. No, it's just true for you. So this is going to be really hard, though, for the relativist to actually keep up in real life. Because if you talk to anyone for any significant length of time, you'll come across things that you disagree about. Whether they're trivial or really important, you're going to come across things that you disagree about, and as soon as the relativist disagrees with you, you can point out, wait a minute, are you saying that I'm wrong? But I thought you said we each have our own truth. How can my truth be wrong? And so that shows the contradiction in relativism there. It's inconsistent. Well, the third problem with relativism is that the relativist cannot make sense of the concept of proof. Can't make sense of the concept of proof. And Marty actually gives a really good illustration of this. This is something that actually happened to him at work. He was at work, and there was a coworker of his that used to give him a hard time about being a Christian. And so she would always kind of razz him about it. And at one point she was saying, hey, truth is relative. That's your truth, but you can't go beyond just saying it's your truth. And so she said, we each have our own truth. But then later, she said, oh, you believe in God, huh? You believe in God. Well, why don't you prove to me that God exists? You prove to me that God exists. Now, does anyone see the problem with those two statements? Truth is relative. She wants him to prove that God exists. It's another contradiction, right? Again, we have another contradiction. Because think about what it means to prove something. To prove something means to show that it's really true. Not just true for you, but true for the other people too. You're proving it to them to show that it's actually true for you, whether you believe it or not. Think about it. How would relativism work in a courtroom? I mean, what is the judge normally looking for? Normally, the judge is looking for what really happened. Except if truth is relative, you can't say that something really happened in any ultimate sense. Each person just has their own truth. So if truth is relative, well then the judge could start the trial and immediately drop the gavel and say, case closed, he's guilty, because I already have my truth. What point would there be to hearing any evidence or hearing any testimony? That's what's true for them, not what's true for the judge. And so, in reality, the judge is looking for what really happened. So this is the third problem with relativism. Now the fourth problem is that the relativist cannot make sense of the concept of lying. Can't make sense of the concept of lying. Imagine that there's someone who comes in that we don't know, and he says he's with St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And he's collecting donations for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And he tells us about how these children need this help. And so we go, oh, well, we want to help. And so we donate large sums of money to this person to give to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Well, what if it turns out that he was actually, that he actually finds a creative way to funnel all those funds, not to the hospital, but instead to his own bank account, and actually goes and buys a Lamborghini, with the money. Now, I think we would be upset, right, if we found out that our money didn't go to the hospital, but instead went to buy this guy a Lamborghini. I think we'd be upset. Why? Well, because we had been lied to. We'd been deceived. What we believed turned out not to be true. And so this is a problem for the relativist, yet again, because think about what a lie is. A lie is a denial of something that's absolutely true. Not just true for you, but that's absolutely true. If truth is relative, and the person comes in saying he's with St. Jude's, and I believe him such that I write a check and give it to him, that's my belief. That's true for me. But it turns out it doesn't work that way. It may be true for me in the sense that I believed it, but it still was false. And so it turns out this is another problem. Let's go back to the courtroom example. Imagine that a relativist has to take the stand as a witness. I mean, what is it that the witness has to recite before giving their testimony? What is it that the witness has to recite?
Tell the truth, nothing but the truth.
Yeah, exactly, the oath. Yeah, and it goes, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Although I guess now you don't have to say that last part. But
Yeah.
The point is, they're supposed to tell the truth. That's the whole point of having them up there. But if truth is relative, there isn't the truth, there's just their truth. They would say, I swear to tell my truth, my whole truth, and nothing but my truth, so help me whatever deity, force, consciousness, natural process I choose to believe in. No, I'm poking fun a little bit, but you see the point. All they have is their truth. Now, it is the case that witnesses, when you have multiple witnesses, they give different perspectives on the same event. And so you do have different perspectives, but the whole point of having the different perspectives is that by utilizing all these different perspectives, you're going to clarify the truth of the matter. You don't have a bunch of separate truths. Instead, they're all pointing to the truth about what happened. So that's the whole point of having a witness. So it turns out that the relativist can't make sense of the concept of lying as well. Now, the fifth problem is that the relativist can never accuse someone of being closed-minded or say that they ought to be more open-minded. Because think about what it means to be open-minded. Open-minded means that you're willing to consider that your view might be wrong, and that someone else's view might be true. Not just true for them, but actually ultimately true for everybody. And so this is why actually oftentimes, this isn't always the case, but oftentimes the relativist ends up being so closed-minded. Relativists often end up being the most closed-minded sort because for them, whatever they believe is true for them. And there's no reason to consider other points of view because that's just true for someone else. And so you have no reason to consider other people's point of view. That's not true for you, that's true for someone else. They also, open-mindedness entails something else. It's actually another problem with relativism. Open-mindedness entails being willing to learn something new. If you're open-minded, you're willing to learn something new. But if truth is relative, can we ever learn something new? No, right? You already have your truth. What are you learning? Someone else's truth? Think about it. What would be the point of going to school if truth is relative? What is the teacher telling you? Just their truth? No, the teacher is telling you the way the world really is. Or at least they're supposed to be telling you the way the world really is. The good teachers do that. Or how many of you have jobs where you have to take continuing education credits? Yeah, I know I do. In architecture, we had to take continuing education credits. And what would be the point of continuing education if truth is relative. You already have your truth. Why would you need to hear about someone else's truth? That's what's true for them. In fact, if truth is relative, there'd be no point in watching the news. Actually, I'm pretty sure there is no point in watching the news. It's pretty much the worst way to get informed on a topic. But that's my little soapbox. The point is that if truth is relative, there'd be no point in watching anything educational or any sort of current events or news sort of program because you already have your truth. That's someone else's truth. That's not true for you.